Hey, welcome to Hell in a Hallway with your host, Billy. Today we have a topic that you may think is a little solemn. I'm like, oh my God, that's so sad to talk about. And it is, it really is. But I'm hoping that it is more enlightening for you. And I wanna say this is not just for victims. This is also for people who perpetrate, who do it. And we're gonna talk about domestic violence today. And we always speak just about the victim. And I'm going to tell you why that's problematic shortly. And this is very different. Most of us don't ever talk about the perpetrator. Now, I want you to recognize that I'm not trying to say the perpetrator is a victim, but he or she is in a very different sense. And as a clinician, I can tell you why. So I'm curious about what your thoughts are after the episode. So drop me a line, send me a message, hit me up on Facebook, because I'm curious, because no one ever speaks from this perspective. And I want to make sure we speak from this perspective so people can have an idea of what somebody needs to do when they're not only a victim of domestic violence, but they also have issues with doing it. When they are psychologically or physically or sexually abusing another person and they want to stop, but they can't. But also what I want you to know, we're going to highlight a very important person today. She has a ministry called Walk and Talk About It Ministries, and she is the founder of this ministry. You can find her on Facebook, Katrina Deal McCall, and please look her up. She is so passionate about domestic violence. She has an incredible story that she definitely tells and talks about, and I am so proud of her and her work in this area of life that we don't tend to spend a lot of time talking about, right? So Walk and Talk About Ministries with Katrina Deal McCall. Please look her up on Facebook. Please join her walking. Please make sure you check out the video she has listed. But we're going to talk a little bit about her ministry in just a second. But I want to give you some stats, right? Stats, nobody think that's fun, but I think it's important that you know. So it's an interesting idea that every 20 minutes somebody is physically abused in the United States by an intimate partner. Every 20 minutes. So by the time this podcast is over, somebody's been physically abused. And that's an incredible number. We're also talking about the idea of 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men. Now that number came from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I want to at least tell you where I got my information from. And we're talking about 1 in 4. That's a significant number. 1 in 9 is nothing to sneeze at either, because we don't really consider men as being in domestic violence relationships, do we? They suffer a different type of abuse on top of the abuse that they're suffering from, right? It's a societal shame that there are victims of domestic violence. But what I want to start with is kind of how this stuff comes into play, right? And I want to talk about, we're going to talk about the power of will of control, and I will post that so you'll know where that is, and also about the domestic violence cycle, because that's what keeps people stuck. It is the cycle. See, we look for we're always trying to help women or people find reasons to get out of a domestic violence relationship. You know what we don't do? We don't find out why they necessarily stay in. We don't look for what makes them stay. See, and that's the part we got to help build up and edify, to give an individual, to help them, empower them to come out of that situation. See, we focus a lot on here. You got to look after your kids. You got to look after your health. You got to make sure you do this. Yes, all those things are true. But we also got to look at why they actually stay in those predicaments. And people would say, well, if she really wanted to get help, she would leave. If he really wanted to get help, he would leave. It's really not always that simple. There's a cycle of behaviors, a cycle of brokenness that happens to a person internally and externally that helps keep them in a conditioned process. And in that conditioned process, they stay in situations that they otherwise would not stay in. And it's important that we understand that. So that way, not sympathize, that's not the word I want, that we can empathize. Sympathize says, I feel sorry for you. Empathize says, I understand you. So once we understand what makes a person say yes to that circumstance, we need to help them find another yes. We need to help a person get there and help them feel empowered that they can. That's important. And here's one other stat that's interesting. It's an average of 7 times before a person actually leaves out of a domestic violence relationship. So people get upset going, oh, he keeps going back. Oh, she keeps going back. It's not an easy process. And we want to wipe our hands of people who are in circumstances that are not positive for them, not realizing they're in their own process and they need help. Sometimes when we tell people that they need to reach out, sometimes we need to reach in. We need to reach into them. So let's look at this power of control wheel, right? I got it on my phone. 1 second. It is an interesting power and control wheel that many of us don't even realize is the reason why domestic violence occurs, right? So I'm just going to give a few examples off of it. And again, it's for the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, or the National Center Against Domestic Violence. And so some of the things that keep domestic violence going in a home is intimidation. You make someone feel intimidated, maybe by the way you look at them, maybe by the way they look at you rather, or gestures, or smashing things, destroying properties, abusing pets, right? That's pretty overt, right? And we're going to speak about overt abuse and covert abuse. It's important that you know that, because we don't really talk about that. Overt abuse is just what I said, right? We're throwing things on the floor. We're abusing pets. We're intimidating, right? We're creating fear. Then there's the emotional abuse, putting someone down, making them feel bad about themselves, calling them names, making them think they're crazy, and that's covert. And I'm going to tell you why that's covert. On the surface, you may say, oh, that's overt. You can hear that. You know that's going on. I'm going to tell you why it's covert. It's an internal breaking down. See, when you break somebody down, you further keep them from even being able to walk away when they even have the capacity to do so. So it's important to recognize covert and overt abuse. Isolation, controlling what a person does, who they see, who they talk to, what they read, taking their phone from them, looking up, just constantly chasing after them, right? Minimizing, denying, and blaming, making light of the abuse. It's not a big deal, or even denying it completely, that it didn't happen, or saying that the person caused it. If you hadn't have done X, Y, Z, if you would have picked up the kids on time, if you would have fixed my food right, if you would have done this, if you would have done that. So that's another way of abusing a person. Using children, making them feel guilty about the children, using the children to relay messages, using visitation to harass the person, and threatening to take the kids away. See, these are another, even though it's very overt in terms of what the person is doing, is very covert, because what it does, it internally breaks a person's spirit down. Right? So a person, even if they are completely, the door is open, the person's out of town, they could leave anytime, they might not. Because the chain is not on the outside. The chain is on the inside. And so when people, other people looking on the outside going, girl, get out of that situation. Or, dude, get out that situation. She ain't even home. He not even there. He out of town for a week. No, that chain is not on the outside. The chain is on the inside. And we have to help a person be empowered enough to recognize that they can disconnect that psychological and emotional chain. Economic abuse, preventing the person from getting or keeping a job, constantly asking him or her for money, taking their money, giving them an allowance. And those are elements of control, right? When I can control you, I can keep you from feeling like you can do things on your own. So that's another form of sustaining abuse. Male privilege. Now this one is different. This one specifically speaks to male privilege. Treating her like a servant, making all the decisions, big decisions, acting like you are a master of her. And you are the one, as if you're male, you're the one who are defining what the roles are and not allowing her to have any part in that. So that is an example of the power and control will that I wanted to be able to share with you. I also want to share the let me get back to it. Sorry. I also want to be able to share the cycle of abuse, right? So here's what's interesting. We need to break this down a little bit and understand its components, right? So this is again from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and it starts with the tension building, right? Where you're walking on eggshells around this person. You don't even know what's going to set them off. Anything you say, anything you do, you're making sure you do everything right because you just don't know what it is it's going to take that's going to set this person, and they're going to go left. They're going to either psychologically abuse you, they're going to physically abuse you, or sexually abuse you. People don't realize that spouses can rape spouses, people. Just because people are married doesn't mean that you have complete dominion over a person's body. So people rape their spouses, and that's another form of domestic violence. And even emotional abuse. People don't realize the idea of emotional and psychological abuse, that is domestic violence. Or denying access, keeping a person from eating, or changing the locks, or locking up the bank account, anything designed to let that person know that they are in control of you. It's another example of domestic violence. So this tension building phase, right? Back to that. Walking on eggshells, not quite sure, knowing what behaviors are going to set him off. And I'm going to tell you what that does to the person who's doing it. They live in anxiety. Can you imagine never knowing when something is going to fall on you? That any moment, at any time, for any particular reason, you can be hit. For any particular reason, you can be put down. For any particular reason, you can be sexually or emotional abused, and you're walking around with that anxiety in your head, with that anxiety in your body, because you're constantly on edge, not really knowing. That is destructive to a person's immune system. That is destructive to a person's ability to feel empowered. Then you have the actual incident. Something sets the person off. And that's the part that we all are pretty clear about, right? We all know about that piece, and that's the piece we pay the most attention to, right? So that's the part where the person actually hits the person. They actually, all those things I explained earlier, sexually abuse them, psychologically abuse them, emotionally abuse them, physically abuse them, or denying them things that they need to have. That's when the actual incident comes. And that's when we all come running. We all come running to help that person during that particular time, because that's what we see, that's what we understand, right? And the person may come to us, or they may not, to be honest with you. It is not shocking when people do not right away seek help, because you know what lives inside of a person who is handling that type of circumstance? Fear, and not just fear. So everybody knows that one, right? That fear lives there. You know what else lives there? Shame. Shame keeps people in circumstances far longer than they were intended to be. When we feel ashamed, we can't let anyone know about what's going on with us, because we can't believe we're dealing with it ourselves. And people are going to look at us crazy if they realize what we were dealing with all this time. So fear keeps people in a circumstance, but also shame keeps them there as well. So here's the part that we never look at. Here's the part that actually psychologically keeps a person inside of a circumstance too. It's that honeymoon phase, right? They're apologizing. They're trying to make up for it. They're buying you things. They're extra affectionate. And I'm going to tell you what I akin that to. So my license is in mental health, and I also have a license in chemical dependency. And it's somewhat very close to the idea of a process addiction. And I'm going to tell you what a process addiction is. That's like gambling, sex addiction. Those things are called process addictions. And what it makes me think of when I think about the honeymoon phase, I think about the moments. I have one client says she lives for the 5% of who a person is, who her husband is. She lives for that 5%. Think about that. 95% of your life is in shambles with this person, but this 5% is so amazing. So you're always trying to behave so that 5% of a person can show up, not realizing that you're losing so much time. You're losing so much time waiting for that 5%. And so people stay in that. And how is that even remotely connected to process addictions? It's anticipation. See, part of the idea of the addictive response is anticipatory reaction to possibly winning. I could possibly win. I could possibly get that. See, even the idea of knowing that you might be able to get something increases a person's dopamine response. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter in the brain that is for pleasure. That's how you feel good, right? You see a piece of chocolate, you feel a little good. I feel good just by looking at it, right? You feel good when you eat things that make you that taste really good for you, right? That's what causes the problem with like overeating. It's not just the psychological piece to it, that's a whole nother podcast, but also the idea of that dopamine response. We just want to feel good. We just want to feel better. And so when that honeymoon phase comes, whoa, dopamine, that means your brain's going pleasure, and you keep wanting to seek it because you're thinking, okay, if I just act like this part can last longer. But no, it will not. It cannot. Because the abuser doesn't know any better than what he or she knows. So there's so many services out here for domestic violence for victims, and I want to be able to make sure I speak to Katrina Deal McCall in her Walk and Talk About It ministries, and it reads, helping victims of domestic violence break the silence and move beyond the pains of their deliverance. It's interesting, it's important for you to know also that she is partnered with the Domestic Violence and Child Advocacy Center in Cleveland, Ohio. So whatever the need is, help is available. And she wants you to know that even if you're still in a relationship and you want to try and save the relationship and move forward, that there's help available. So make sure you connect with Katrina Deal McCall, and she can get you connected, provide additional support. Make sure you seek out counseling as well that can assist you in building yourself up again, right? Because you have to assume a different identity. Because it's easy to sit in a certain type of identity where people have power over you, right? We shouldn't have power over people. We should have power with. So sometimes we struggle and we don't understand what that means, right? Power over you means I actually lack power. See, people who lack power tend to try to exert power over other folks, but you didn't realize that, huh? So now I want to speak from the perpetrator's perspective. Now, I am not here to say that I am here to advocate go perpetrator. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, there is something going on in that perpetrator. It's not that they're inherently evil. They are broken in their own right. People who abuse other people are broken. But they don't have a lot of services for people like that. What I tend to see people go to is anger management. Anger management is not the end all be all. It is part of the puzzle, but it's not the full picture. There is a brokenness that is going on in a person who cannot regulate themselves or feel so powerless that they have to exert power over another human being in order to feel like they have any power at all. Men and women both go through this, particularly men though, and I'm going to speak to that. And I'm glad to see now that in my practice that men are seeking help more and more. I'm getting a lot more men who are trying to figure out who they are. Because if society tells you that man up, get it together, don't cry. You know, if a society is telling you that, or if you're raised with that thought process and you have some brokenness inside you, you don't know what to do with it. You're unaware of how to manage it. So when men are depressed, did you realize men tend to be external in how they handle depression? That means other people get hurt. When women are depressed, they tend to be internal in their response. They hurt themselves. So again, I'm not here to say that the perpetrator doesn't deserve is to be advocated for, but I am more inclined to make sure people get well, that we catch people before they get into circumstances where they are perpetrating against people. not just giving them anger management, helping people with actually counseling. An 8-week certificate of anger management, and to me, doesn't do much of anything. It is a start, but people need way more than that, folks. People who are perpetrators of domestic violence have a different kind of brokenness, and it's a powerlessness. And 8 weeks of anger management is not going to do it by itself. I thank you so much for being a part of this podcast today, and I'm hoping that you were able to take something from it. I am, again, so interested in knowing your thoughts and what you think as it pertains to looking at it from both perspectives, the victim and the perpetrator. And it's not one versus the other. It's just a picture, a snapshot. This was just a snapshot of what that looks like. Again, there's the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. There is the Domestic Violence and Child Advocacy Center in Cleveland, Ohio. And again, look up my girl, Katrina Dill McCall, on Facebook. She has so many events. There's one coming up May 16th. May 16th, if you want to listen, Facebook Live at 3:30. Join her, listen to her. And she had an incredible story for Anita Mason. She's going to be there. Shout out, Anita. But I want to make sure that we speak about this, especially during this COVID moment, this quarantining, where people, anxieties are peaked up high, not just because of living with an individual who perpetrates domestic violence, but also because of what's happening. We're sitting around with constant news stories of quarantining, potential dying of death. May is snowing if you're in Northeast Ohio, right? Murder hornets, like all this stuff is happening, and we're living in times of uncertainty. But guess what? Things were never certain. Certainty has always been an illusion. So we have to be able to rest. We have to go through a process of being able to live in ambiguity. See, once we do that, anxiety reduces. Thanks again for watching, and I so appreciate you. Keep in mind that it's not about destination, folks. It's also about revelation. See you next time.